Welcome to a special audio file recording that I did October 12th, 2010 for the Ventura County Writers Club. And I'm offering this up because it's a nice introduction to an area that is very little talked about, but is central to a lot of my teaching. I wrote a whole book about it called The Rapid Story Development, the Enneagram-Story Connection, how to master the Enneagram to become a Master Storyteller. And there's not a whole lot on the internet about the Enneagram system and using it as a writing tool versus for character development. If you don't know what the Enneagram is, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm going to do more videos like this to get more into the Enneagram itself. But this video will describe what the Enneagram is and how writers have typically used it. But then it's going to go into a whole other area, which I use the Enneagram for, which is actual story development itself, using story structure principles and so on. I think it's one of the best things out there since sliced bread. It's an incredibly powerful development tool, not just a character development tool. And this class in particular was for a group of people who don't know the Enneagram from a steak sandwich, or story development in general from a steak sandwich. And in this little talk, it's about an hour long, it's not a little talk, I go into those two core areas. What's the Enneagram? How does it work? How do you use it? How does it relate to story structure? And then there's a short Q&A at the end. But it's all audio. So I'm going to layer in a few graphics here and there to be in the background to show up while you're watching this video, but it's primarily an audio experience. So you can just kind of, turn away and just listen if you want. But I think it's a very, very good basic introduction. As I said, I'm going to do more videos on this topic and start expanding what I have on my channel and in general in terms of offerings on my courses and that sort of thing. Going into more and more of the Enneagram-Story Connection, as I call it. Because again, I think it's really powerful, and there's very little, if anything, out there on this, other than just about the Enneagram system and how it relates to character development, which is all very valuable, but it goes so much farther beyond that in terms of being a tool, a powerful tool for writers and storytellers in general. Okay, so by way of this little introduction, I just want you to know what it is you're getting into here, and enjoy the audio.
When Sigmund Freud came to the United States for the first time in the early 1900s, he said, "I bring them the plague," and that's what I'm bringing you tonight, is the plague. Now, he wasn't talking about getting anybody sick or anything like that. What he was referring to was he was bringing a set of ideas and a new paradigm that was going to threaten the existing paradigms, that was going to upturn the comfortable apple cart of all the psychologists and psychiatrists that existed in that day. And that is exactly what he did. And for the next 60 years, what do we have? Psychodynamic theory is pretty much was the only game in town. And at the risk of sounding like a snake oil salesman, the Enneagram has that sea change potential to affect you as a writer, to impact not just how you write, but also the content of your writing and your final product. It really does have that potential. Because there are lots of folks out there now who are working on the Enneagram, and there are people who teach Enneagram in relation to writing, but it's usually in a very narrow typing kind of field where they talk about how to just write characters. What we're going to talk about tonight is how to connect this phenomenon of the Enneagram with actually how your story is structured. It's not just how to write better people. It's about how your entire story is affected by the dynamic of what the Enneagram is. I have a question, though. Who here is familiar with the Enneagram? On a scale of 1 to 10, just nod your head. 5, at least 5? Don't know. Okay, so some of you are familiar with the Enneagram. That's good. We're just going to scratch the surface on this. So there's so many components and so many pieces that relate to how it relates to story, but we can't really get into all of that. It's going to be almost like putting your mouth to a fire hose as it is with some of this stuff. But yeah, I'm serious. This is really like a 2 or 3 day workshop. But let me talk a bit about what the first piece of this is, which is the Enneagram, so that some of you have a high level conceptual idea about what it is. It is an ancient symbol. This starts with the circle, and that represents the whole. This image without the numbers was discovered like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and in Greece. And Ennea is Greek for 9, and that's where the 9 points come from. And then over time, the symbol as an esoteric tool was moving farther and farther west, and eventually ended up in Russia, and was brought to the West, quote unquote, formally by a gentleman named Gurdjieff, who was a mystery school teacher in Russia, who designed this mystery school called The Work, which is very dance-oriented and very metaphysical. And he brought that to the West. And then the Jesuits picked up on the Enneagram and were using it internally for psychotherapy within the Jesuit order. And lo and behold, it eventually ended up in California. And everything ends up in California. And 2 psychiatrists, one Chilean, Shazo, and another psychiatrist got their hands on it and started to apply modern psychology principles to it. And then they started adding the numbers and then looking at the different relationships and so on between all the numbers. And starting in the 1970s, there was this explosion of development that occurred around the Enneagram, and it turned into what it is today, which is a very popular tool for personal growth, spiritual work. And writers, it didn't take a whole lot of rocket science to figure out that if this was about people, that writers could use it to write about characters. And so there have been a lot of folks who have applied it to character development. But what separates the Enneagram from all the other psychological stuff that's out there that people talk about that writers can use, like Myers-Briggs typing inventory, Berkeley personality profile, the DISC system, there's lots of different psychological assessment tools that writers can use to type their characters. They're all designed for behaviors and traits, and not really designed to give you the ideas of what motivation is behind a person or a character. They will identify and tag behaviors and the traits of people, but they won't necessarily naturally get underneath what the motivations are. Talented therapists and coaches and organizational development consultants and all of those kinds of folks who use those tools have tried to fill in the gaps and the holes for that piece of it. And they say, okay, well, you're a this, and that means you do this, this, and this, and now here's what you can do about it. And the here's what you can do about it part, based on the motivation that they're interpreting, that's what they bring to the table. It's not a natural part of MBTI or these psychological tools. That's what separates the Enneagram from all these other tools. The Enneagram is an emergent property of being human. It is not something that we created as people. It is something that exists because there are people. That's what makes this so powerful. This is a living metaphor, and we're going to get into what the numbers mean and what the types are. This is a metaphor for not just traits and behaviors, but why people do the things they do. This is the default settings of everybody. Just like your computer has a default setting, you turn it on, cross your fingers and toes, it boots and it works. Same thing with us. We have default settings as human beings. If we don't do anything, if there was no nature, nurture, just nature, there's so much of this that would just be automatic settings for us. But it isn't just one or the other, it's both nature and nurture. And this is what human beings over the eons have recognized and put into this amazing structure to represent what people do, how they do it, and why they do it. And that's why it's a natural tool for writers when you're trying to generate characters. But what I'm saying is it is much more fundamental than that for us as writers. Because the Enneagram is about your emotional intelligence versus your IQ intelligence. Who here is familiar with EQ? Have you heard that term? Yeah. It's been floating around for decades. It's used in the corporate world, in psychology, and there's been a lot of research on it that emotional intelligence is 80% of your ability to succeed in life versus IQ, which is only 20%. EQ is your ability to relate. Essentially, it's other things, but how do you relate to others? What are your interpersonal relationships? What's your intrapersonal relationships? Okay, so who on this planet, beyond artists and writers in particular, are concerned about how we relate to people? It's essential for a writer to have a strong and a high EQ to be successful, not just in their own lives, but as writers. And what we found in using the Enneagram, and I'm certified to actually teach this in business contexts. Businesses are using this thing like candy right now. Toyota, Genentech, all the major 500 and 100 Fortune companies are using this internally for leadership development, team building, and that sort of thing. Because what it does is it builds and it enhances and it strengthens emotional intelligence in their staffs. That makes them more productive, makes them better people, yada, yada, yada. It also will make you a better writer because guess what? You have an Enneagram. And it filters your stories. We'll talk about that at the very end of what we're talking about. But your Enneagram matters. This isn't just a flavor of the month tool and technique. Oh, here's another writing guru. No, I am not a guru. I really dislike that term, but it's all right. But your Enneagram is a filter. Just like your characters filter their Enneagram, you filter as well. You have speech patterns, you have blockages, you have your up and down sides. All of that impacts you as a writer. When you work with the Enneagram as a writer for any period of time, and this is the plague part of this, you will be affected by it. It will change you, not just as a writer, but it will change you as a person. How many of you have kids? What would you pay to be able to talk to your kids to know exactly what they have to hear in order to hear you? How much would that be worth to you? Yeah, that's what I thought. The Enneagram tells you what that is, and there's a sheet in there that shows you speech patterns for each of the types. Your characters have speech patterns. They talk to you, and you filter through your Enneagram. Now, you can see how this could become a nightmare. You know, this just all this minutia and all the details, and well, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do this. This is the plague part of this. Okay, there's a lot here that you can pick and choose from. What's too much for you, and what's going to inform you in terms of helping your writing. You get to kind of pick and choose how much and how little of this you want to use, but you can see how this is such a complex web. So you can use this on your kids. a lot of parents do, and your spouses and your significant others. So let's talk about this real quick. Can you tell me when I'm like half hour? When I'm, yeah. This basically shows you 9 strategies of life. Okay, and in each of those strategies, you've got 9 different strategies for how you handle fear, 9 different strategies for how you are vulnerable, weak and strong. Vulnerable, you know what I mean by vulnerable when you're strong? You win the lottery. And then all the grubby relatives come out of the woodwork, right? Can I borrow this? And now you're in a very strong position having won the lottery, but now you're very vulnerable because now you're a target. Okay, so there are ways that you can be gotten, and in this there are 9 different ways that you can be vulnerable, both in your weakness and in your strength. And each of the types do it differently. So it's 9 strategies for how you are vulnerable, 9 strategies for how you handle fear, 9 strategies for how you're successful, 9 strategies for how you can fail, the low point and the high point. And those are all basic life strategies that each of these types have. There is on the inside first page the drive types. I've kind of given you sort of a question, a statement that each of the types would state about themselves. It shows an essence of that nature and some of the positive and negatives. But I'm going to walk through each of these now really quick, just to show you a sense of what I mean by how a character would function in the world from the standpoint of where they're starting in a story. Okay. We'll start with the one, to be right. Okay, this is the character, and again, the Enneagram isn't something that you pick up off the grass. It is something that happens to you in your formative years, where you are watching the world around you. It's a developmental process where you, as a child, learn through osmosis, learn from the people around you, learn from your experience certain of these patterns of how to react, okay? And part of that's looking at your parents' Enneagrams, even though you don't have an Enneagram book there when you're 2 years old. But you see it, you hear it, you smell it, you taste it, you touch it, and you get it, and this stuff happens to you because it's part of our default settings. We have all of these numbers in us. We're all of them. But there's one that is our core drive. And if you put a gun to your head and said, no, I don't want to be that one, that's your drive. Okay? That's the one that makes you go, ew, I wouldn't want to go to lunch with that person. The one, to be right. These are the ones, these are the folks, these are the characters who early in life learn, okay, the way to be safe, the way to get loved, is to find the one with the power and follow the rules. Do it right. Make sure that you follow the rule book, because when you don't, the love is taken away. And that's how you can, that's how you're unsafe in the world. Do it the right way. They have lots of lists. They dress impeccably. They use you should, you ought to, this is something that has to happen, very pointed. And you know these people in your life or at work. You know ones, you've been up against them. Very righteous, very correct, the right way to work, the right things, and they don't tolerate anybody changing and getting off the game plan. But that's how they survived as children. They knew the rules, and they followed the rules to the letter. Okay. Twos, to be loved. Helper, they're called the helpers, and all of that. Don't get hung up on the labels. It's the function that's important, not the form of the name. But I like these particular names. To be loved. This is the one who's discovered as a child that the way to be safe, find the one who has the power, and make yourself indispensable to them. Help them. Do everything you can. They're the only one that you've got to focus on. Be the helper, be indispensable, make that happen, otherwise you're in big, big trouble. And if they say, no, I'm not going to love you, keep trying, but then it gets to the point where it's, all right, you're not going to love me? Fine. I'm going to make you love me. And they become controlling, and they become obsessive to get that love, to get that safety. Okay. To be loved. Now, each of these, well, we'll talk about this in a second. 3 is the achiever, performer. The threes came to the pattern of understanding that, nah, it's not about getting the one with the power to love you. There's no percentages in that. It's about getting everybody to like you. That's what you got to focus on. How do you do that? You win. You achieve. They're the prom queen. They're the captain of the football team. They're maybe both. They'll do anything they can. And you know the mother threes who push their kids. Be the head of the chess club. Be the parents who have their daughters up on the stage at 5 years old. Looking like beauty queens. Achieve. That's how you get safe. That's how you get the love. That's how you know you're valued in the world, is because of what you do. They're the therapist's nightmare because they perform emotion. And think about your characters when you think about that. These are the performers of emotion. They feel everything very shallowly. They're in a therapy session with a therapist. Well, I said something really nasty about your mother, and it doesn't. Aren't you angry about that? Oh, you want me to be angry? Oh, one moment, please. And they'll perform right on cue, but they won't feel anything at any depth. The performers, the achievers. They're looking for value. That's really what they're looking for. And ultimately, they're afraid that they don't have it. Okay. The fours, to be special, or the artists, or they're not really artists necessarily, but the fours are the ones who learn there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I've got to find the one who can tell me what that is and fix it. There's something fundamentally missing. What's the missing piece? And I've got to find the one. Fours are incredibly emotive, connection, just effusive, very self-referencing. Blanche Dubois is a perfect four. Okay, perfect four. Yeah. As soon as I start making the connections to some literary characters, there's a book over there called The Literary Enneagram by Judith Searle, which is a terrific book. And she does a lot of this work too. And she does some wonderful stuff with the Enneagram and literary characters, and she breaks it down really detailed. But Blanche Dubois is a perfect example of a four character, very self-referencing, very obsessive, very wistful, everything's, and the melodrama is queen here, okay? Melodrama is queen. Okay, that's the four. Fives are the thinkers. These are the ones who discover as children that the way to survive, you see, the problem is people. The world would be a great place if it wasn't for all the damn people in it, okay? So to get safe, control the people. Control the people. So remove yourself. And the way you do that is you figure it out. Figure out the world. Give me the information, give me the data, I'll crunch the numbers, I'll retreat into my ivory tower, and I'll come up with the solution or the answer, and then I'll bring you the information. Maybe. They don't always do that. Hate strong emotion, hate emotionality. It's very matter of fact. Sherlock Holmes is a perfect five. Okay. Sixes, safety, security. These are the ones who discover the way to be safe is to know where all the landmines are. They have trust issues. They're the ones who discover that the way you've got to be safe in the world is have a plan. Okay? When there's that pothole and that hole there and that hole there, and they've got it all planned out. I got a plan. I know exactly where I need to move and step. I can bob and weave. And I've got a plan, because you really can't trust the world. You really can't trust people. Okay? So you have the plan. You figure it out. Sixes will, when their lives are working, go out of their way to dismantle their lives so they have a problem to solve. You've seen this in your own lives, maybe. Everything's fine, and they're just anxiety through the roof, because now it's, when is the other foot going to fall? There's no problems. And they will dismantle their lives so they have problems, and they got to rebuild everything again. Okay? They are unbelievably loyal. Once you broach that trust issue with them and they get your trust, and you get their trust, they're the best friend you'll ever have. Their loyalty is unfailing, and they're incredible in that way. But they're the ones who are, trust issues, have the plan, always looking for the problems. Okay. Sevens, to have fun. These are the ones, my favorite example of a seven is Lilies of the Field, the movie Lilies of the Field with Sidney Poitier. I don't know if you know, for anyone, has anyone know what movie I'm talking about? Sidney Poitier is the rover that comes through the little town, and the nuns are there, and they hijack him to build him a chapel. And as far as they're concerned, he's the messenger from God who's come there to build their chapel. And he is the happy-go-lucky wanderer that walks through, and he's a total seven. Be light on your feet. Be fast. Don't be pinned down. Come on, don't be so heavy. Relax. Let's go have fun. Oh yeah, the tax guy's at the door. Come on, let's go have a party. Don't have one good friend. Have 100. okay? Anything to distract you, anything to make sure that you don't focus on the pain. That's the problem. When you're quiet, when you've got to focus, when you aren't all over the place, you might be overwhelmed by the pain of life. So keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And there's that wonderful scene in Lilies of the Field at the very end where Sidney Poitier is at the top of the chapel that he has in fact built. And in the eyes of God, nobody else knows about it except the audience and God. He writes his initials in the top of the chapel where nobody can see it. And he makes his mark in the world, something that no 7 ever really likes to do. And he does it there. And that's his growth arc. That's his growth moment. You know? But it's a very quiet one. But it's pure Enneagram 7 integration. Okay? We'll talk about that in a second. 8s, the leaders, self-reliant. These are the ones that realize, unlike the 5s who the world is dangerous because of people, no, the world is dangerous because of the environment. The world is dangerous. The way you control the world is by being the one to make the rules. Make the rules. Then you control the people and the environment. That's how you get safe. These are the folks who are totally self-reliant, all very, very strong, high sense of justice and injustice. And they have a presence about them that is palpable. I was at a workshop where we were getting certified for this, and one of the ways that you learn the Enneagram is by watching it in action. It's not academic. You have groups come up of people who are whatever drive, and they say, one of the exercises is tell the group something about your drive type that you think is most misunderstood. And there was this group of women who were all 8s, and 4 of them walked up in front of the group. And they and that's all they did. They didn't say a word. And everybody in the class, me included, were squirming and like, whoa, what arrogant bitches they are. And it was unbelievable. And then at the end, we asked them, okay, well, what was going on? They go, what are you people talking about? We were just standing there. We weren't doing anything. We weren't thinking anything. They're the most projected on of all the Enneagram types because they have this incredible solidness. And it's that solidity that is actually hiding a fear of weakness and vulnerability. They hate 4s. They hate 4s. There's no line here showing that, but there's definite animosity, between 8s and 4s because of the perceived weakness that they have in themselves. They're over the top control. Okay, and then 9s, my favorites. 9s, peacemakers. The world needs certainly more of those. But the 9s are the ones who discover that, the way to be safe in the world, the way to find the love, don't make waves. Find the common ground. Get everybody in agreement. Make sure that everybody is understood. Step into the background and disappear. Do everything you can not to be a target. And find the common ground. Make the peace. Make the peace. Don't get anybody angry with you. And that's one of the biggest problems for 9s is their self-abandonment that ultimately occurs because nothing matters. They don't matter. Everybody else comes first because they've got to do everything they can to make sure that everybody else is heard. So there's no hostility, no difficulty, no anger directed at them. Okay? So that's a very quick summary of each of the drive types. And now you see these lines. There are other lines here. They all relate to each other in some ways. But these lines represent called integration, disintegration. In the Enneagram community, there's some disagreement about whether these lines really, should mean anything from an integration, disintegration standpoint. But integration means where do you move to find your best self, and the disintegration is where do you move when you're in your worst self, when you're falling apart, when you're backed against the wall and everything's really, really bad. This is where you're going to go. For instance, a 2. Oh, I forgot a line. Twos disintegrate to 8, integrate to 4. Meaning when the 2 gets, I'm going to make you love me, they move into the downside of the 8, which is controlling. and that's how they act as a controlling agent to get you to love them. When they move into their 4, they're moving into that being loving as opposed to I have to be loved. You know, that's the beginning of their integration, and it's a lot more complicated than that. But each of them has that low point, high point, which relates to story structure, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, so all these drive types all relate to each other from the standpoint of integration, disintegration. They all are a whole part. When you are integrated as a human being, you have touched on all the high aspects of each of these pieces. Now, you're not going to write characters that do that, because that is probably not going to be all that interesting. You want people who are in the downside when they start that story. So when they move into a later part of the story and that final resolution at the end, and there's some growth, then they're moving into the high aspect of that drive type, okay? Or not. Maybe they go even deeper into the dark side. It doesn't have to be all, roses and ribbons. But this shows you that very, very powerful dynamic of how they all relate to each other and what the tool actually does. Okay. So how much time do we have? You're good. Okay. Okay, so that's the Enneagram in a huge nutshell, okay? Very powerful Gestalt tool for understanding all the core drives of potential characters that you can write. Now, how does this relate to you as a writer? I mean, why is this something that isn't just another flavor of the month technique, just to write good characters, okay? The reason is because of this, my little magic formula. Plot equals character equals the Enneagram equals structure. In English, what that means is this. Plot, essentially, is what your characters do on the page. What is the scene level action that your characters carry out on the page? What they do on the page is determined by who they are as people. In other words, your main character is not delivering pizzas because, gosh, that's something you wanted to do. They're delivering pizzas because of who they are. They're down and out, they can't do anything else. Their dad owns a pizza parlor and they got to do it because dad makes them. There's some reason for why they're delivering pizzas. Okay, what they do on the page is determined by who they are as people. Who they are as people is represented in the best form by their Enneagram type, because Enneagram is about motivation, not just about the description of how they act in the world, but why they act in the world the way they act. All of these taken as a whole, plot equals character, character is Enneagram, gives you a sense of what your structure is going to be, because all of this, especially this relationship here, determines some of the core elements of what story structure is all about. In a properly designed story, structure is an organic thing. It exists outside of you. Your story has a natural structure. It's not something that you create. When you're in tune with your characters, when you're in tune with the story you're telling, it's got certain components to it that are natural and organic and are outside of your process. The story finds you, you don't find it, if you're really in that groove. And you know what I'm talking about. The story's writing itself. Well, that's that feeling. That's what happens when you're in that groove with the story. It doesn't always happen. But when it happens, it's magic. And it's just, as writers, it just sets you on fire, right? Well, these are some of the nuts and bolts pieces, because we're talking about craft here. We're not talking about the art of writing. We're talking about the craft of storytelling. Two different things. Writing and storytelling aren't the same thing. So here we're talking about the storytelling part of it. Every character needs a moral problem. If your character, your protagonist, does not have a moral problem, your story is a situation. It's not a story, because there's nowhere for them to go. Now, there are lots of stories out there that don't have, moral problems in their protagonists, and they're very episodic stories. There was a great movie in the 1960s, farces very often have this problem. They're so busy slamming doors and having mistaken identities and all of that sort of thing. There's not enough time because they're fast, fast, fast. You can't really develop characters too much. But a good story, the main character has a moral problem, which means they're acting in the world in some immoral way. And they're starting the story off in this position. Okay? Each of the Enneagram types have a poison, it's called, which is the thing that when they get caught up in, sends them down the tubes. Okay? 8s, theirs is greed. That's their poison. The lust for power, the lust for control, the lust to be in control. Okay, it doesn't always have to take the form of money grubbing. It can be, there's other forms of greed. Having it your own way is a form of greed. Okay, when that character, in whatever form you decide as a writer to have that happen, when they've got that moral problem in effect, now you've got somewhere to go with that character. See, we'll talk about each of these real quick in a second, but the reason this is really important is because you've all heard the term, well, the characters don't ring true, right? Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, they're not like real people. How do you know? Have you seen everybody? No. You don't know. But with this you do, because here you've got everybody at a very high level, at a very archetypal level. Okay? If you do this, if you follow your nose here, not in some cookie cutter fashion, being a prisoner to the process. No. This is a tool. It's not. You got to paint by numbers. But if you do it, then you will have characters that ring true because they are the people who you see living in life every day. You walk into a movie theater, you see a story that doesn't work. If you don't have the language, most people don't. They don't know. They're not writers. They don't know about plotting. They don't know about character structure. They don't know about structure in general. They go, oh God, this didn't work for me. Well, why didn't it work? They can't explain it, but they know it because we've all seen enough and read enough in our lives that we have absorbed what good storytelling is, what good structure is, because we've seen so much of it. We may not have the intellectual verbs and nouns and all of that to be able to describe that process, but we know it when we see it. And people will know it in your books and in your characters when they see it. They'll recognize Aunt Tilly. Oh my God, boy, she's so special. Just like my Aunt Tilly, because you nailed it, because you got it. So what's the character that you're picking? What's the moral problem that your character's starting with? This tells you kind of, if you already know what you want to do, the kind of problem you want to write about, that tells you kind of where you want to go on the Enneagram and what your main character is going to be. Which are the types? Well, I want to write a character who has to learn how to love. That's a really popular one. Okay? Well, this is a good place to start right here. To be loved. And now you've got a whole set of questions that you can ask and begin to fill in that give you somebody who's multidimensional and real, as opposed to filling out spreadsheets. Well, yeah, she likes pizza and she's got blue eyes. And not that you shouldn't do these spreadsheets and describe exactly what your characters look like and all of that, but these will point you into real substantive questions about the nature of the character in terms of what motivates them and what they're likely to do when they're pinched and what they're likely to do when they're elevated. Okay? So the moral problem is absolutely critical. If you don't have a moral problem for your protagonist, you got a situation, you don't have a story. Desire line. Your main character has to want something. This is Structure 101. What's the goal? What do they want to do? And it can't be, I want to be a better person. That's okay, but it's not enough. It has to be something tangible. They want the money. They want to get the girl. They want whatever. But again, it's got to be consistent with the character. An 8's not going to want the same thing as a 3. A 3 is going to want the money because of image. It's going to make me look good. Okay? An 8's not going to care. Is going to care less about that. They're going to want something else. So what drive you pick will impact what the ultimate desire line is going to be. And now, where do you start? Do you pick that first and then go here? Do you go here and then go there? Doesn't matter. I would probably start here. What's your gestalt? What's your feeling as the writer? What's the story that you want to tell? And then retrofit it, and then go back That's what I would do most often, because you can't really start here. This isn't your story. Your inspiration has already happened. You've got something you want to write about. So fill in these holes, or take Truby's book and do the 22 steps, or do the 7 steps, or whatever system you want to use, and then go back and then start looking at the Enneagram once you get a handle on this, there's a learning curve on this. Don't kid yourself, but that's okay. And retrofit and reverse engineer it. That'll work. The next piece is the opponent and the low points. Now, I didn't give you these, but I've got them up here. I've got little matrixes that I made up that show you every story needs a central opponent. Okay, and the central opponent is a very particular character in the story. It's not just somebody who's oppositional. Okay, the central opponent in any story, like in a thriller or a mystery, especially in that kind of story, is the one character who is best positioned to stop the hero or heroine from getting what they want. That's the central opponent. But even more and more importantly, because your story is essentially about character, not about plot points, whatever the hell a plot point is, the opponent is the one character best situated to take advantage of the weakness of the hero or heroine. They've got a moral problem, which means there's something they have to learn. There's some hole that they've got that they're going to fill by the end of the story, hopefully. The opponent is the one person who can take advantage of that. Okay? As an example, low point. 9s are terrified of being isolated. 9s are terrified of anger and hostility. An opponent to a 9 in a story, whatever form it takes in terms of what the goal is that opponent is trying to stop that 9 character from getting, they're going to disrupt the peace, they're going to promote conflict, they're going to foment disconnection from others, they're going to focus on personal attacks, and they're going to prey. They're going to prey on the 9's lethargy and sloth, because that's the tendency of the 9 when they get scared, when they get frightened, is to become lethargic and not to act. That you can see in any story how that could be the death knell for any character. As soon as someone knows that point, oh boy, they are in deep trouble. And that's why the central opponent is so critical in any story. They're going to stop the hero from getting what he wants, but they're also going to prey on that weakness. What's the weakness? What's your Enneagram type? This tells you where to at least start, even if you don't get religious and obsessive compulsive about using this. It can at least point your nose in an effective direction in terms of where to go with your character. Okay? Same thing with the low point. The low point is that stage in any story or movie where it appears the hero has lost all hope, right? They've lost the girl, abandoned by everybody, they've lost all hope of getting what they want, and then at some point they rally, right? They rally and they start coming back up with a new resolve, and then they reunite with the team, and I'm talking very formulaic here, but that's the low point, is when all hope seems to be lost. Truby calls it the visit to death. Okay. Each of these has that low point. When that character gets into that low point, this is when the 2 gets abandoned, gets betrayed by everybody, gets unloved. Okay, I'm going to get very obsessive and very controlling. It's that downside of that disintegration. So again, this is all tied into the Enneagram typing, all tied into your character and what motivates them. Okay? And the self-revelation. At the end of the story, what are they going to learn about themselves? What is the new equilibrium? What is the new status of that character? What is it they're going to learn? The 2 is going to learn. It's not about getting loved, it's about being loving. Or some form of that. It doesn't have to be that literal. But it's the essence of what the function of what that is. The Enneagram tells you where that character needs to end in order to ring true to the reader. The 2 can't suddenly discover, oh yeah, I'm a leader. That's okay, but that's not natural for the 2. That's not where they're going to go necessarily. Okay. Now, if you can make that work and pull that off, okay. But the chances are it's a lot easier not to fight it, because this is natural human behavior. This is the natural matrix for how people actually work. And if you've got all of this consistent with the two from the enneagrammatic standpoint, you don't want to blow it at the end of the story with them discovering that, yeah, we got to go have fun. No, it's not a Bollywood number at the end of your book. Okay, so then the other piece of this is dialogue. And that's not a structure element, but it's a technique element that's important, because and there's a sheet, and on the one of the sheets I gave you is the speech patterns and the body language patterns for each of the drives. And if you read that at all and have been paying attention to how I speak, you might get a sense of what my Enneagram is. I'll give you a hint. Trying to figure out how to do this talk in 60 minutes drove me up a wall. I'm a 9, okay? And nines, if you've ever been in meetings or if you have somebody in your family they're constantly they fill you with so much bloody information you want to just shoot them. It's like, just get to the bloody point. That's what 9s do, because all sides have to be heard. Everybody's got to understand where you're coming from. All the possible permutations have to be explained, because somebody might get angry if you don't understand their position. Okay, so so what happens with folks like me is that there's so many. I'm going off on one right now. There's so many tangents that you're trying to get understood. This is what people do. You can't not live your Enneagram. Every day we all do it. We all play it out, and so do your characters. And so do your characters. And when they fail as characters, it's because you're not in tune with this complex matrix. Okay, that's why this is so bloody exciting to me. I mean, it just blows my mind. Okay, and the last piece, which is so important, core relationship. Stories are not monologues. Yes, there are lots of stories, lots of probably famous literature out there, great literature, in fact, where there isn't a core relationship that drives the story. But stories are usually a conversation between two people about some entertaining argument. My favorite example is Harry Met Sally. She's a 2. I forget what he is. But these are two. She's a 7. He's a 7. Probably. Yeah, maybe. But she's a 2. Love me, love me, love me. Question. But they're going through the story together, having an entertaining argument. What's the entertaining argument? Exactly. That's what a brilliant job the writer did. It was clear. Did they answer the question? No. Because to answer that question would have spoiled the whole movie. Because you don't want somebody pontificating, telling you whether you can or can't be friends with men and women. It's an unanswerable question. But in the process, you saw the changes that took place in these characters. And the writer nailed it. They nailed it. But there was that entertaining argument. Who your protagonist goes through the story with is not a minor choice. It's not because, let's make the other character a guy because the main character is a woman and she's an attorney, so let's make that guy a criminal. And no, that might all be very nice and formulaic, but it doesn't. This has to be a window into your protagonist, this relationship. That's why it's a core relationship. In fact, every character in your story, unless it's some procedural mystery story that you've got to have, the maid come in to explain how, Colonel Plum died then okay, it's just the facts, ma'am, and that's what you need. But every character in your story needs to be a window into the problem of your protagonist. All your subplots, all your backflashes to backstory, even the backstory. It's all part of the metaphor for the bigger question of what's your character, what's the problem being solved. And everybody is at service to that in the story. Now, this is very theoretical and very, it's kind of maybe too much, but the point being, I'm going off on my 9 tangent. The point being, the core relationship is a really fundamental one in your story, and it has to relate back to the main character's problem and who they are as a person, and that is all dependent on this. So this is what I'm saying. We haven't even talked about subtypes and wings and leans and all this. There's so much more to this. But you can start to grasp how, as a tool, this can begin to point your nose toward really multi-dimensional characters and interrelationships between characters that are structurally consistent without you taking on some cookie-cutter approach to how you tell your story. This isn't about constraining you. You're already constrained. You already have limits as a writer. Tell yourself the truth. This is about directing and harnessing what you already know and what your talents are, using a tool that as you mature with it, as you learn it and get the subtleties of it, can start pointing you in very complex interrelationships with your characters and getting the actions on the page so that your stories move quickly, they're characterologically consistent, and they're thematically consistent as well with your character, and not just plot. I hate the term plot point. Thanks to Sid Field for that one. It's like the act structure. That's another of my hot points. So I'm done. I just get all worked up about it. One thing I did want to mention, and we didn't talk about it, but maybe in the Q&A if we have a Q&A. Story genres. And Judith Searle talks a bit about her. She's got a workshop, I think she teaches some of this stuff. Specific genres actually apply to specific Enneagram types. So certain genres lend themselves to, that's a good starting point. For instance, fives are caper stories, detectives, mystery stories. Nines are very good for fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of stories. Twos, obviously, for love stories. Eights, westerns, loner stories. That kind of stuff. So the genre can very often, be a pointer to you in terms of what your main character might be or could be. Again, if you want to go against type, sometimes that makes for a more interesting story. But there's nothing wrong with formulas. Formulas work. That's why people like them. Try making a cake without a recipe, right? It's when you don't add something of yourself to the formula that it becomes tiresome and boring. Chocolate cake is okay for just so long until you got to add some zest to it, which is your creativity, your individuality, your vision. You add raspberries or papayas or whatever, and you make the cake your own. But you still have formula. Formulas are wonderful. Just make sure that you bring something of yourself to that process, so it's not same old, same old. But genres are very often a good starting point. If you know what genre you're telling, you can very often see what is a natural fit right there, and then start from that point. As I develop workshops and this stuff, I'm going to actually develop tools for people so that they can take this through a process to decide what path is right to go down with their story. Depending upon where they are with their stories, because I think this is just a gold mine from a writing standpoint. Now, Martin Amis could stand up here, or Jonathan Phrasing could stand up here and go, "What the hell are you talking about? I don't do any of that stuff." And they're right. But I'll tell you something: the number of writers in the world who are so incredibly talented and connected and intuitively know how to do this already, you can count them on your fingers and toes. There are people out there, and they don't, I don't want to be constrained by process. No, my art must fly like the wings of a... That's a four-writer talking there. Most of us poor slobs need direction. We need help. That's why there are all these writing people out there like me who stumble in the dark just like everybody else in this room, and occasionally one of us stumbles across a piece of the truth of the mysteries of writing. And we get all excited and we get up on a stage like this and start sharing the information. But I'm just one guy, okay? Don't drink my Kool-Aid, don't drink anybody's Kool-Aid. look at everything, read everything, take every workshop. We've all got pieces of this pie. And what you have to find as you get older and as you work through your process creatively is you see the pieces that work for you as a writer, and then you take what works and you don't take what doesn't work, and you come up with your own toolbox. I think this is one of the best, I won't say a hammer, but it's one of the best tools you can use. You know, when you see the world as a world of nails, all the tools you use is going to be a hammer, right? But, see, 9 tangent.
Question.
Yeah, I'll shut up. Yes.
I'm saying take questions.
Oh, yeah, question.
Yeah. Who made the original relationship between the numbers and the characteristics?
Oh, that's a very complicated question. I don't have an answer to that. I think it was a combination of people. The Jesuits really came up with a lot of the original use of the numbers. They weren't quite as. There's a couple of books over there that go into very extensive detail about what the types are and their pieces and blah blah blah. But the Jesuits really kind of came up with a number system, I think, and some of the high-level relationships of what the types and their qualities might be. And then over time, Shazo and a few other prominent mental health folks started applying modern psychology principles to it. And then, Rizzo Hudson and a bunch of, Ginger Bogda and a bunch of other folks started breaking it out even more and discovering even more interconnections and more complexity. So it's really been a combination of a lot. But I think the Jesuits really were the first ones to get the numbers going and find those relationships.
Is there a one-to-one relationship between the drive type and the speaker type? In other words, if you're determined you're a 5, then you'll be a 5 speaker as well?
Yes. Does it mean that you won't do other things? Again, we're all of these things. We have all of these in us, and you'll see people who do, other behaviors based on situations. It's not like, you're not your Enneagram. One of the first things you do when you start learning the Enneagram is you go type crazy. You start typing everything. You type your dog, you type your furniture, you type, because it's part of the learning process, but you start seeing it in life. But you're not your Enneagram. It is you, okay? And you're all of these things. And when you think you've got it, you're probably wrong. I thought I was a 2 for years. I thought I was a 2. I always suspected I was a 9, but I didn't want to go there. I thought I was a 2, and it's just part of the process. But again, I'm not trying to teach this to you as a personal growth tool. I highly recommend it. But this is a tool for you as a writer. You have a certain leeway here. You're not bound to some constricted rules about your own personal process. You're trying to create fiction. You're trying to tell a story. What is its service to the story? Use this as a tool to inform that process. Yeah.
How do we connect the great literary writers of all time with the idea of the Enneagram? Do they have a subconscious idea of it?
Oh, I think all the great writers, because they have high emotional intelligence, because they are observers of human nature, I think they know this stuff. I think a lot of you intuitively know a lot of this stuff. And what I'm just doing, or people like me are doing, is we're giving you a verbal and visual framework and a language to attach to it. I think you probably do a lot of this already in your writing, but you mix it all up, and people don't have this in a mature way in themselves, so they can't identify where you're off. It's not about being perfect. It's about just trying to get it as right as possible. But I think to answer your question, I think all the greatest writers are just, that's part of that God-given talent they have, is that they're just incredible observers. I went to Hedda Gabler the other night. Hedda Gabler, the Ibsen play, written in 1890, blew me away. Ibsen, if you've never been to an Ibsen play or read any Ibsen's work, 1890, this guy's dealing with stuff that is just like, it could have been written yesterday. The personality and the personality qualities and the interactions and the moral problems that all the characters are going through what an observer of human nature, just blew me away. So that's the connection. They got it. They got it. A lot of us just need help.
One more question, Jeff.
Yes.
Does this approach allow for anything random behavior or chaotic behavior?
Yes. Does this allow for any chaos or any randomness? My first question would be, why would you want to introduce randomness?
Because that's the way life is. It's random as hell.
Yeah, but yeah, it is. It is. Stuff happens. But in your story, do you want stuff just to happen? Nothing should happen in your story that doesn't serve the story, unless randomness does. The one character where chaos is a huge issue is this one right here. They hate chaos. Ones hate chaos, disorder, rules, follow the rules, form. You want their opponent to foment chaos and to prey on that sense of order. Okay, that's that relationship. But again, your fiction isn't life. Your fiction's fiction. You got a story you're telling. If randomness is a part of your story, then great, you can throw it in there. But that's like saying, why have the guy be the pizza delivery boy? Okay, we're done.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you all very much for putting up with my rambling.